part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
A swing and a drive to deep right. Saunders at the wall. It hits off the top of the wall. Naquin's around second. He's on his way to third. He'll try to score. Here's the throw. Not in time. Usain Naquin.
The right-hander's pitch. A swing and a high fly. Deep left center field. It is gone. Oscar Gonzalez sends the Guardians to the Division Series.
Hi, everyone. What's good? Thanks for tuning in to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast, right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
This is part 2 of our conversation with Guardians broadcaster Tom Hamilton. We had a lot of great conversations in part 1, beginning with his early days of broadcasting, some great Bob Feller stories, the rule changes, his favorite calls. This part 2 goes in a little bit different direction, Scott.
It really does. Yeah, we're going to talk more about the 90s, some more or less recent history, and we're also going to dive right into the 2023 season. We'll recap the 2022 season, see whether or not he has some predictions, some people to watch. Remember how the Stephen Kwans of the world came out of the woodwork, and maybe there's a few of those that he can kind of let us know about as we head into this upcoming season. A lot of high expectation with the Cleveland Guardians. Here is part 2 with Tom Hamilton.
You started out in 1990, and I remember that season because I was in high school. That season you had Alex Cole. Remember Alex Cole?
Oh,
yeah. And they moved the fences back at the old stadium because they thought he was going to steal, however many bases, be able to cover all that ground. And Candy Maldonado was the DH, and he might have hit maybe 15 home runs that year. And that was about the offense from that team.
Yes, Sandy was Rookie of the Year.
Yes, he was
Rookie of the Year. Chris James had come in that trade. And that team actually did better than it should have. They played probably above their skis most of that year, but you had good pitching with John Farrell, Bud Black. Charlie Nagy was just starting to come up, but Tom Candiotti was in that rotation, and Greg Swindell. And so, and then the next year you lost a franchise record 106, and Candiotti got traded, and Bud Black got traded, but Hank Peters knew what he was doing. And, he built that juggernaut, even though he never gets credit for it. He built what proved to be a juggernaut then, in the mid-90s. I think we all knew things had changed, not only when you were moving into a new ballpark, but on the same day you signed Dennis Martinez and Eddie Murray as free agents. And you were like, they're coming to Cleveland? That's when you knew it was, different ball game now.
Tom, you and Scott are talking about those early 90s teams. Bad teams, those 4 years before you moved into Jacobs Field. Do you have a really positive or fun Municipal Stadium memory from those years?
Well, trying to think. What I remember as much about that play, we had a great broadcast vantage point, but in April, games usually weren't very good, and you could just kind of look out beyond the outfield fence to Lake Erie and see these chunks of ice bobbing up and down. And this was before the movie came out, but you always wondered later, was Leonardo DiCaprio on any of those chunks of ice bobbing up and down in Lake Erie? But as far as memories, trying to think of anything, part of what made, and I think I'm tainted by it, 93 was the final year there, which we had those 3 sellouts to end the year against the White Sox, but 93 seems like a blur because of the voting tragedy that spring. We thought we were going to have a really good team, and we're going to. And then that season was done before it ever started with the tragedy that took Steve Olin's life and Tim Cruz's life. So 93 then just ended up being one of those years where you were like, oh my God, let's get it over with. But yeah, as far as any great memories, I mean, you will say one thing: the mice were bigger at Municipal Stadium than I had seen outside of New York City. Those things were well fed. It was a horrible place for baseball, but I loved it. I mean, it's my first major league park. Again, we had a great vantage point, as far as you were down low, right above the backstop and the screen behind home plate. So for me, it's good memories because that was kind of your first home, so to speak. I remember it's not a great memory, but our engineer was a great guy, loved to collect autographs, but not to sell, just for himself. Back in the day, I think it was CBS Radio did the Game of the Week on radio, and Johnny Bench was the analyst. And for some unknown reason, we were the Game of the Week. And our engineer went in there to Johnny Bench and gave him 2 baseballs, wondered if he would ever sign them, and told him, I don't sell them, but I'm a collector and keep them. And Johnny Bench signed one. He asked him to sign the other, and Bench said, I think you've had a pretty big day already. And I don't know why that sticks out in my mind, but you're like, really? It took you longer to say that than to sign the second baseball. So every time I see Johnny Bench now on TV, I'm like, yeah, I know a story that you probably don't want out there.
Did you take anything from old Cleveland Stadium? Are you a memorabilia guy? Like, or you just like put it behind you?
I've got a picture of Herb and I, a picture of Mike Hegan and I, and a picture of Hank Aaron and I. Hank Aaron was my guy as a little guy growing up in Wisconsin when he was with the Milwaukee Braves. And then he came to do a benefit to raise money on the East Side. And Mr. Dolan was able to convince Hank Aaron to come up. And we did what was called a kind of like a fireside chat. Hank did not want to do a speech and did not want to, have to deal with that. But they just wanted somebody to kind of be a narrator and kind of take Hank through his career and ask questions and that kind of thing. And luckily enough, Mr. Dolan asked me to do it. And again, that was like, that's the only player I've got a picture with and an autograph with. And that comes from a fundraiser when I was with the ball club. But no, I'm not a big collector. One, we're not allowed to. And so it was always easy to tell friends, look, my kids can't get autographs. We don't allow our kids to get autographs and pictures and that kind of thing. So, and you can imagine what it was like in the mid 90s. I mean, that could have become a second business doing that.
Last past 90s Indians question, then we'll get into Guardians current present day. You talk about those players and those teams. My favorite player growing up was Albert Belle and Ken Griffey Jr. Outside of the Indians. And I'm a firm believer, and I know Scott is too, if Bell didn't develop those degenerate hip issues, he would be one of the greatest hitters of all time. I think largely forgotten now and in the Hall of Fame. And some may argue he should be in the Hall of Fame, even though the numbers don't dictate that. For our younger listeners, explain to them how good Albert Belle really was.
Well, I think first and foremost, John, no one's ever done what he has done. 50 homers, 50 doubles in a season. And he did it in a shortened season. 95 was 144 games. So that's 18 fewer games than a normal season. And he had the first and only 50-50 season in the history of the game. That in itself, when you think of the great players and the number of years, he was so menacing. He was so intimidating to the guy on the mound. Some guys were whipped before he stepped into the batter's box.
Yeah.
And he kind of encapsulated the big bad bully Cleveland Indians lineup. And Cleveland loved it because it was the first time for most people in Cleveland that they were kicking sand in people's faces and not the other way around. And so, and I had a great relationship with Albert. Now, do I now? No, I don't know that he does with anybody really. But he was always good to me. He was always great to my oldest son, Nick, who was shoot back then, 5, 6 years old, and Albert and Kenny were tremendous to Nick. And so I remember that Albert. Now, when he left us, he changed. I went down to talk to him his first year there with the White Sox, and it was like he didn't know you, wanted nothing to do with you, and you're like, wow. But, if Albert was mad at the organization, then he was mad at everybody. So, and if you worked for the club, so be it. But when he played with us, I had a good relationship with Albert. He did a number of pregame shows. I think he's one of the most intelligent hitters the game has ever seen. He had a book on everybody he faced. He worked at it.
Mm-hmm.
He worked at it. And to your point, had he stayed healthy, the biggest travesty of the 95 season, 2 of them. Mike Hargrove wasn't manager of the year and Albert Belle wasn't the most valuable player.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I no longer cared who the writers picked for awards because I knew they didn't know what they were doing. They were influenced by Albert Belle not being a gregarious guy, and you gave it to Mo Vaughn. Look at the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And, you give Lou Piniella manager of the year because Seattle had one great month and it coincided with the Angels being a complete collapse. How was Grover not manager of the year for what he did with a club that hadn't been in the playoffs since 1954? So I just think here's how maybe the best way to describe Albert. There aren't many people I can say this about, but if I'm going to the ballpark, whether I'm a fan or a broadcaster, I'm never missing one of his at-bats. If I wet myself, I wet myself, but I'll go to the bathroom after his at-bat because you don't know what you might see that you've never seen before. And that was Albert.
That 95 team kind of surprised a lot of people, even though the cornerstones were there in 94. Fast forward 2022 last year. A lot of that Guardians vibe going into the season with the name change and everything. No one really knew what they were going to be. Were you shocked that 22 Guardians team last year stayed consistent throughout the whole season, the whole summer, while also debuting a Major League record, 17 rookies that made their Major League debut? And then in addition to that, go on a somewhat of a deep playoff run in the ALDS after beating the Rays.
Yeah, John, I would have said coming out of spring training, if everything falls in place, the perfect scenario, we're 500.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
But, no one saw this. And quite honestly, we were only a handful of games above 500, tied for first place that first week in September. We'd lost 5 in a row, and it looked like, finally, reality is hitting, Most of these guys, they've never played in September because the minor league season's over after Labor Day, or it used to be. And, I think we all kept waiting for Chicago to wake up, which they never did. And I thought Minnesota would play better than they did, but they took it to those 2 clubs head to head in September, and they never blinked. And I guess we should learn by now, any team that has Tito as its manager always has a chance. And now the bullseye is on their back, and they're the hunted this year. We'll see how they respond to that. But my goodness, I think it'll be hard to replicate being that injury-free as we were. But these guys are going to be better. I think we could be a better team this year and not have as good a record, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I think some guys, there's always a regression or a correction. Mm-hmm. But the amount of talent that we have coming, I just saw, again, for what it's worth, everybody ranks them. But I've seen yesterday ranked the farm system 4th in baseball, and today, I think it was ESPN or Keith Law,
2
from The Athletic, number 2.
Yeah, I saw that too.
The bottom line is, look, I don't get hung up on that, John and Scott, because Stephen Kwan was never in anybody's top 100.
Right.
Shane Bieber was never in anybody's top 100. So again, does that mean anything? Maybe not, but still rather have those guys being thought of in that regard. So, yeah, I think we've got a chance now to have a a really good run here again for multiple years. And for me, it's all about going to spring training and having a chance to play in October. And I wish people in Cleveland were more appreciative of that, in that, since Tito's been here, we've had 10 years where we've been relevant. Their worst year, when Tito was gone most of it, they were 80 and 82.
Right.
And you've been in the playoffs 6 times. You've been to a World Series, all in a decade of baseball. We've not gone through this 5 years of losing 95 games every year. And now look at where the club is. Nothing's a given or promised in this game, but this future looks as bright as it's looked in a long time. I don't remember us ever having this much potential top-line pitching, either on the big league club or one step away.
Yeah, Tom, that window is wide open for them, and the Guardians don't get enough credit. The organization doesn't get enough credit, with the success they've had. My opinion, fans and people around here have taken them for granted when you've seen what the Browns have struggled with, and now the Cavs are good again. But the Guardians always seem to they always get pushed away, unfortunately. And, I think you'd probably need another deep run of playoffs to really probably skew the fans back to that vibe, maybe, hopefully at least.
I guess, but I heard some media people last year say, well, it's a nice story, but if they don't beat Tampa Bay, this was all for nothing. Now, granted, they're affiliated with the Browns in the media, and I'm like, if the Browns would go 10-6 or however many games they're playing now, 11-6 or 10-7, kids wouldn't go to school for a week in January. They'd call school off.
Right.
So I've never understood the double standard.
Yeah.
I've never understood, maybe it's because I'm from a different state, but Bradley talked about it too, because before he came back home and was hired by Channel 8, working in Madison, and he goes, Dad, I never hear people in this state on talk shows talk about, well, this is a Brewers town, or this is a Packers town, or this is a Badgers town. We're a sports town. And that's what I feel like Cleveland is a sports town. But I feel like there are certain people in the media that are driven to make it, what do you mean you're a Browns town? The people cheering for the Browns are the people cheering for the Guardians, cheering for the Cavaliers. Maybe not Ohio State. I know Cleveland's divided in that regard with the Ohio State, because there are kids that go to Michigan and so on and so forth. But I've never understood this in Cleveland, why you have to be one fan of one team and that's it. Hell no. What could be better than what Philadelphia has? You go to the World Series, you go to the Super Bowl in 1 year. I mean, we had that here with the Cavs and the Indians at that time being playoffs. They didn't go to the World Series the same year, but there's nothing that uplifts a city more than when their sports teams are doing well.
And the Guardians, they made a couple of moves too. They spent money. A lot of people didn't think that would happen. They signed Josh Bell and that catcher from Tampa Bay. I mean, there's a lot of upside here with these two players and what they can bring.
I agree. And hey, it is what it is. And I think we're going to hear more about this now with all the financial problems that Bally's is having and how that's going to impact potentially 14 major league teams and their television revenue. No need to get into that now. But, look, until you have an NFL monetary system, which will never happen in baseball, you're going to have certain clubs that can spend X number of dollars versus, what do we have now? Half dozen teams at least that can spend over $200 million. And I think we'll be at about $86 million. There's a group of us in that $80 to $105 million range. And again, it's all dictated on the market mostly and your revenues. And so, it is what it is. I think it speaks volumes to what Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff have done. Can you imagine how we're lucky that they have chosen to stay in Cleveland, because if they had an unlimited payroll like some of these GMs have, then the rest of us wouldn't have a chance. I mean, the amount of money the Mets and Yankees and Dodgers and all of them spend, what it does almost guarantee is they'll be in the postseason, but they're not winning it.
Mm-mm.
And, that's why, like them or not, cheat or not, what Houston's done is one of the most remarkable things we've seen in baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of this 2023 team, do you have a player that you're looking at, or two players that are poised to have a big 2023 campaign with the Guardians, or people you're looking at?
You know what?
It's early, but I'm just curious.
I'll tell you one guy, John. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Josh Naylor does this year. And in visiting with him yesterday at the facility, he looks great. He feels great. He said last year, at one point, he had to do a routine to get his leg to a place where he could play again. He did the same routine 90 days in a row, never a day off. And it's not like he did a routine for 5 minutes. We're talking hours every day in that rehab. This winter, he's been able to just focus on getting stronger and working on his craft, not rehabbing from an injury. I thought what he did last year was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And he's really one of the emotional leaders, obviously, on this team. So I don't think we know how good Josh Naylor can be because, he hasn't been fully healthy. I just think Andres Jimenez is scratching the surface. I just think who knows how good he's going to be. To me, it's a lot like Jose Ramirez. None of us ever thought Jose would become what he's become. Maybe the same with Andres. I don't know what to expect. I think Stephen Kwan's always going to be really consistent. Oscar Gonzalez, I think we're going to have to be prepared for some ups and downs. He's still a young player. I think the guy that could be really a bigger deal this year than maybe people are envisioning is Will Brennan. Because I just think you can't discount. Here's a guy every year in the minors hitting 3-something, driving in 80-some runs, maybe not hitting a lot of home runs, but as we've learned with this club, if you can hit doubles, he'll hit for more power than Kwan. Will Brennan would be a guy I would keep an eye on. And then I think some of it's going to be pitching. They say this Tim Herron, a left-hander out of the bullpen, has got a chance to be dominant. I mean, by the end of the year, Sam Hentges was probably the one guy nobody wanted to see come out of the Cleveland bullpen. He was that dominant. So I'm anxious to see these young kids that are on the precipice. Tanner Bybee, Gavin Williams, Daniel Espino. I think the key with Espino is, can you ever keep him healthy?
Sure.
Logan Allen, not the original Logan, but this is Logan T. Allen. The thing that excites me, guys, is that, a couple of years ago, the season was over when you lost Plesac, Savali, and Bieber. Nobody can afford to keep losing pitching like that. Now we've got guys that aren't going to make this team that should be in the major leagues. And you're going to have some fortification there when you eventually have some injuries. So, and I still think we could make a move with some of the young kids we've got and all the shortstop prospects that we have. So, it's hard. And again, with young guys, if the three of us would have been sitting here last year and you would have said to me, what about this Stephen Kwan kid? I would have said to you, well, tell me about him because I've never heard of him.
Yeah.
True story. And so, I think when you've got a farm system as good as Cleveland's, there might always be somebody there. I hear so many great things about the Brian Rocchio kid. I just haven't seen enough of him. We'll see.
Yeah, one prospect I've always been high on, and I've talked to Andre Knott about it extensively, is George Valera. Outfielder, has risen quickly in the system. I think he could be an impactful player down the road. Maybe it could be a September, mid-summer call up. We'll wait and see.
And we will have more from Tom Hamilton right after this.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm Gary, and we love ball cards.
And if you love ball cards too, good news. You just found your new favorite podcast. From breaks to grading.
And from collecting to flipping, join us on the Ball Card Show.
The sports podcast for the sports collector.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Tom, before we let you go, Scott and I do a segment here with all of our guests where we do a quick rapid fire section where we ask you a question and it's the first words that come to your mind. If you have
real
to
easy
pause
questions,
they're really easy, fun questions, sports related, non-sports related. First words come to your mind, go for it. Just kind of a little fun little thing that we do. Okay, and they're tough. Some are tough. This one might be tough, and there could be maybe more than one answer.
All right.
Your all-time favorite Indians player.
I can't go there. And the reason is I've got too many.
That's true.
I knew you were going to say that, but I had to ask. Yeah.
But I mean, Jim Thome, Sandy Alomar, Charlie Nagy, if there's a Mount Rushmore, those three are on it. Jason Giambi'd be right there too.
Ooh, okay.
Interesting. Do you have a favorite Guardians player? Somebody that when they come up to bat, you're watching intently. You kind of covered a few already.
Currently.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Stephen Kwan because he's so unique. Yeah. I don't know that any of us, I mean, maybe because I had two boys play D1 and in the minors, but when we'd go to these showcase events, you'd always be like, oh boy, because some of these kids would come up and it'd be like, it was showtime. They're hitting the scoreboard with home runs and whatnot. If Stephen Kwan went to a showcase, I don't know if he'd get offered a scholarship by anyone, except he knows how to play the game and manipulate the bat, his bat to ball skills, his ability to take 2 strike pitches for ball 4. I love watching him because we don't see that guy in our game anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always amazed at him. And maybe because I like him so much and he's just so unpretentious. When we're in the playoffs, I was behind him in New York and I was walking back from something and Steven was walking back for something. No one in New York City stopped him. Nobody had any idea who he was. And I think that's what makes him so unique and special to our game.
Yeah, and he's an old school player, but also a great story in the interactions that I've had with him in the locker room before or after games. He's such a down-to-earth guy who's very respectful, just like a lot of those players in that Guardians locker room really is.
Real quick, Stephen Kwan, didn't he go like 120 pitches without a swing and a miss at the beginning of last season?
Yeah.
His rookie year. And then it was controversial if it was a check swing or not.
Right. Yeah, I think it was against the Reds where that was that call, right, Tom? It was like, well, was that a check swing or was that a foul ball? Right. And then I think, Tom, the first time he struck out, which was sometime in April, but you had to date back to like early September of the previous season, AAA in Nashville, I think.
Right. And it's just like, and again, that's why I don't pay attention to a lot of these scouting reports. That's why you go talk to baseball people. And I thought something too, the club didn't get enough credit for. They didn't try to manipulate his service time. He started day one. And where would we have been in April without Stephen Kwan?
And if it wasn't for Julio Rodriguez out in Seattle, Stephen Kwan probably could have won Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
Even though I think he did finish third behind the catcher in Baltimore. But and those two guys deserve the award. But Stephen Kwan having that consistency for a rookie is just unheard of in that type of
I thought Rushman in Baltimore did a great job, but this kid played on a playoff team.
Sure.
This kid was your leadoff hitter. This guy set the tone every night.
Yeah. Okay. Favorite visiting ballpark?
I'll go two there. Old school, new school. Old school is Fenway. It never gets old. It never gets old. And I love Seattle. Now, the only park I haven't seen is Atlanta. We have not been to the Braves' new ballpark yet. And look, there's no such thing as a bad park anymore. You know, well, there are Tampa Bay and Oakland, you know, but I love the city of Seattle. That ballpark is tremendous. We open there again this year. There's just something about Seattle that I have to, I'll tell you another really underrated ballpark, guys. And if you get a chance, you need to go to Target Field, Minneapolis. Now, San Francisco, it's great because it sits on the water, but not many have that chance to sit on the water.
Like you said, we sit on the water here, but we're looking at ice on Lake Erie. That's a little different. Favorite visiting city?
Seattle. Seattle would, it's going to be interesting now because now every year you're playing everybody. So we're going to get to cities we normally don't get to. I love Boston too. I mean, it's funny. I think sometimes the city and the park go hand in hand, and also where we broadcast from is part of it. Like everyone raves about Pittsburgh's ballpark. I hate it because it's, I always wanted to see what it was like to do a game from the blimp, and I do when I go to Pittsburgh. It's you're so high that you're just guessing.
I'm in the minority on this, Tom, but I think PNC Park is very overrated. I agree with you on that.
Interesting.
I think the view is great.
Yeah.
Scott and I went there as a game. Scott, what year was that? That was when Barry Bonds was in town. We were trying to see Bonds for the first time because he never came to Cleveland in interleague. Right. So this would have been like, what, 02?
02, 03, something
and
like that.
We had seats in the third base line, foul territory. And the way the seats were orchestrated, if you're trying to look straight ahead, like you were turned the whole time. And the concourse was weird. It reminded me of a minor league ballpark. The view's fantastic.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's a little overrated.
Yeah. And if you're in that lower bowl, you don't really see the bridges that well, do you?
No, you don't. You don't. No. I've been at Atlanta's new ballpark. It is beautiful. And I like what they've done on the behind home plate concourse. They've turned that into like a garden/team museum, which is very cool.
Oh, wow.
You don't see it in the play, obviously, but you have to go. It's underneath the press box behind home plate, and it opens up to the stands. It's very cool, very creative. Tom, favorite restaurant in Cleveland? I know there's quite a few, but if you had to pick one, where are you and Wendy going out on date night?
You know what? Cabin Club in Westlake, and we love the Blue Point downtown. We have heard so much about the Marble Room, but, I can't make a reservation 3 years in advance to get into the Marble Room. So right now, Cabin Club probably for us, and we just love its intimacy and food, and love the Blue Point. But boy, trying to think of other ones. Oh, there's, like you say, there are so many, and but we'll get to that Marble Room here someday.
How about a TV show you're streaming right now, or maybe before spring training started? I know it hasn't officially started, but you know what I mean.
You're not going to believe this, but the kids convinced us. In fact, Bradley and his wife, Brittany, convinced us, you've got to watch Wednesday, off the Addams Family. And, we said, okay. And I just turned to my wife when we get off the phone, look, we'll watch the first 15 minutes, then we can just dump out of it. We were addicted to it. And it was like, I couldn't believe we liked it, but the writing was so good. And Jenna Ortega, the actress that played Wednesday? I didn't even remember Wednesday from the Addams Family. I remember everything else, Pugsley and Morticia and Thing and all of that. But we were stunned by that. So that was the latest one.
Bradley has not told me about that. I thought he said to me that you're big into like crime shows or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm terrible in that. We start a series, and about 8 episodes in, I'm like, I'm sick of this. So we watched the movie last night because my wife loved the book where the crawdads sing.
Great movie.
Yeah. I'll tell you another movie we just saw recently that was like another one of those where you're like, no way. Vengeance. And I forget the guy that was in office that was in it. And Ashton Kutcher, you wouldn't even know it was him unless you knew he was in the movie, plays this great villain. And it's just another one of those kind of off the wall. We went to the theater too last week, and because Tom Hanks was in town to throw out the opening pitch last year, and then we had him up in our booth, which I would say that's one of those, moments you'll never forget. And then you find out, having him sit in the booth with us for an inning, what an incredible human being he is. But that new movie of his, Man Named Otto, that was being filmed in Pittsburgh, where my wife is actually from. So, and we enjoyed that. So we're more movie people, I think, than kids got tired of me watching West Wing like over and over.
Oh, that's the show Brad was telling me about that you watched.
Yeah. And I was like, kids, you don't get it. In this show, the politicians actually work together.
Right.
They try to make our country better. Doesn't always work, but there's at least some hope.
We need more Martin Sheens in the world, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny.
Before we get to our movie question, I got to ask you, give me the one thing you look forward to most about spring training. It's coming up. You're there. What is the one thing that you look forward to the most?
I think seeing everybody.
Yeah.
Seeing Tito again, the coaches again, the players again. I think that's probably it. You look forward to that first exhibition game or spring training game, and then about the fourth inning, you're like, oh my God, we got 31 more of these, because those can get a little tedious, and you kind of. But I would say about a week into spring training games, you're ready for the regular season to begin, even though the players aren't. But I think the biggest thing too, and again, we're so lucky. I mean, every day you're around Tito, he makes you laugh. And I think a lot of us have said the day he retires, the rest of us will too, because to ever work with anyone like him again, none of us will be that lucky.
Baseball movies. Do you have a top 2 or 3 that when you see it on, you watch it, or ones that it just sticks in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, probably the same as everybody. Love the Natural. Trying to think now, Field of Dreams. I think they're all kind of similar to everybody else. Bull Durham I was okay on. I was in the minor leagues at the time, and so maybe it felt a little more relevant, although I never saw Susan Sarandon in the minor leagues to the parks that I went at. So.
Is Major League on your list?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, and I think part of that is because I know Bob Uecker, and guys, maybe I should take back. No, let's do 1A and 1B. 1B would be doing a game in spring training that, the Brewers are playing, and it's in Maryville because he's not traveling. So you're going to get to see Bob. You're going to go into his booth. You are going to laugh harder for 15 minutes than you've ever laughed in your life. He is as funny in person, guys, as he's been in the movie. I mean, he is a comedic genius, and he's always been really good to me. I think the Wisconsin tie means a little something. But I think that's the way Bob is with most people. But I can't tell you how funny he is. And he's a great guy, a great play-by-play guy. And I think Bob turned 88 or 89.
Just recently.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
how's his health right now?
He is so sharp. He looks great, keeps himself in great shape.
Good.
Now, he doesn't travel anymore, so we won't see him in Cleveland, when the Brewers come to town this summer. But I mean, you talk about a national treasure, and I think he'll do the games until he can't. You know,
He just turned 89 on January 26th.
89.
Wow, Tom,
you would say he looks maybe 60, only because of the gray hair.
Tom, you still gonna be doing Guardians games when you're 89?
I hope I'm alive when I'm 89, but I won't be doing games. I know that.
I was showing my son, because I was going through and I was playing a Bob Uecker clip, and I was trying to explain that to my son, who's 18, and who Bob Uecker was, and the old, you remember the Krylon commercials,
yes,
and the Miller Lite commercials. And, you know, he's now getting to the age where he kind of gets that dry humor, because I have that dry humor. And he kind of laughed. I go, yeah, but back in the day, these were the commercials. That was him.
It made Miller Lite. Mm-hmm. In addition to making a lot of those guys. And you know, the thing I love about Bob too is his love of the state of Wisconsin. That's never gone away. You know, Bob could have gone anywhere. He's never, you know, he grew up in Milwaukee. You know, he and Tony Kubek grew up in Milwaukee at the same time. So those two guys came out of Milwaukee and had major league careers. And he just, that state and that city means so much to him. And despite all of his success, you know, he's remained, you know, very loyal to his roots. I mean, he just, he'll tell you too, he had so much fun. Because you'll ask him about the other, I never watched the other major leagues. I had no interest in.
Yeah, you're not missing much. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what Bob said. And they gave him a script for Major League. These guys don't know Bob. They haven't worked with him. And he had said to them, guys, you mind if I ad-lib a little bit? Pretty much everything in that movie he said was an ad-lib.
Wow.
And so then they tell stories of the actors who maybe that day they didn't have to come on the set because they didn't have to film anything. If they heard Bob was filming that day, they would come on the set just to hear what he was going to say. Actors who had the day off would come back onto the set just to hear what Bob was going to say.
I could see Charlie Sheen doing that because he's such a baseball guy at heart.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they said all of them. It's you know, that I forgot about it. I'm glad they tell the story too about, it was before my time. So the movie came out, I think 89, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they shot that movie in County Stadium in Milwaukee.
Right. Because County Stadium was actually a smaller version of Municipal Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And but they tell stories. There was a bar in Cleveland, and I don't know which one because I was hired to start in 90, but they would show that movie every year in that bar, kind of like before spring training. And they said like grown men would be crying in the bar because it's the only time they'd ever seen Cleveland win. The only time they thought they'd see him win. And it was like, then we started winning in the mid 90s. And so kind of took away that one night at the bar where they could watch that movie. But that's a classic. And can you imagine that movie without Bob Uecker in it?
It won't hit right.
No.
And that jacket he wore too, I think that made it as well.
Well, and how many of us are like, you know, front row or just just a little bit outside.
Yeah.
Ball 9.
Yeah. You mentioned how Fulton County Stadium in Milwaukee was, County Stadium. Fulton County is down in Atlanta, but Milwaukee County Stadium was a miniature municipal stadium. They were built 20 years apart by the same company, Osborne Engineering.
They were?
They were, yeah. 51 was when that opened, and Municipal Stadium opened in 31. And Osborne also did League Park, I believe, and Tiger Stadium in Boston. Wow. The list goes on and on and on, which is crazy. But like that, they had to find the stadium, and I don't know why they didn't shoot it in Municipal Stadium. Maybe it was the time of year. Maybe the Browns were playing, but I
don't know. It could have also been Uke. It might have fit his schedule better because so much of that was shot from the broadcast booth there at County Stadium because the press box, all of that. It might have been with his schedule. I don't know if we were playing then yet.
Maybe.
Yeah, that was, you'd go to County Stadium. So when of course, I went there forever as a kid, but, and then when I was working, but when you went there as a broadcaster, you didn't realize it was So they had brats every day in the press box. And during the game, they had a half barrel on tap. People are drinking and writing their stories. I went in there one night after one of our games, and I don't know why. I went in there to say goodnight to somebody, and I won't mention the poor guy's name. He was passed out over his keyboard. It was like, can you imagine it? And we're talking in the 90s.
Wow.
So, I mean, it wasn't that long ago.
Sure.
Needless to say, that changed at the new ballpark.
Scott, we got into media about a couple decades too late.
Yeah, right.
You know?
We hear stories from Danny Coughlin telling back in the 60s
well,
and 70s.
there's you put Danny Coughlin in with that group with Euchre and them. I mean, that's that would be a room where you'd never stop laughing.
Right.
Tom, a couple more, and then we'll let you go. You've been gracious with your time, and Scott and I really appreciate it. A few more questions in rapid fire here. Can you name us an Indians prospect in your time that turned out to be a bust, but you thought and everyone thought was going to be big?
Yeah, there was and I can't remember his first name. He was coming up the same time as Manny Ramirez, another Ramirez. And I thought he was going to be a star. And he almost made our team one spring. And, but I think he played a little in the major leagues, but he was a Ramirez. We had heard so much about the shortstop, but he was already here before I got here. Lewis, the first round pick.
Mark Lewis.
Lewis. And I was there at the tail end of Corey Snyder's career when he was just starting to go the other way. Mm-hmm. But as far as a prospect,
mine was Bo Mills. I thought he was going to be really good.
Yeah. See, and I never got to see Bo play other than maybe a couple of minor league at bats. Without looking over some names, Bo's a good one. He was first round pick, big, strong power hitter.
Farm boy.
Yeah. His dad, of course, being Brad Mills. I don't think
that would have been Bo Mills was 07, I believe.
As a pick. Okay.
Or 07 or 08, one of the 2 years.
When I got here, the talk was, and he'd been here a while, that Greg Swindell was, they drafted him because he came out of Texas. He was going to be the next Roger Clemens. Greg had a hell of a career, really, in particular, out of the bullpen, especially,
right,
and pitched a long, long time. He was never the star. A lot of those teams in the early 90s had guys that they thought were going to be those kind of stars and never did. But the Ramirez kid I remember the most in the 90s, and he just had a great camp one year for us. I would have to really think on that one. You got me on that one.
All right, this is just a random player question because he's one of my favorite players growing up. Do you have any Julio Franco stories? I know he was gone by the time you got here. Did you have any interaction with him?
But he came back.
Yeah, he did come back. I didn't have much interaction with him at the time other than to say hi or whatnot. Mm-hmm. I mean, the old guys said early in their career, when they went to New York, they were always like, we don't know if we'll ever see him again. And he would miss sometimes 2-3 games. Nobody knew where he was in New York. And then you look at him at the end of his career, he's still playing in his 40s.
Right.
And was so strong and whatnot. I thought that was one of the mistakes that we made. They traded Paul Sorrento and signed Julio Franco. And I don't think they realized how important Paul Sorrento was, one, balancing out the lineup with a left-handed bat, and how he really was a glue guy in the clubhouse. Got along with everybody, no matter what nationality. And they lost more in Paul Sorrento than they realized when they traded him and signed Julio Franco. But I didn't have enough interaction with Julio other than the stories they would tell. They'd go to New York and they'd be like, we have no idea if we'll see him.
Was that a move back in 96? I think it was. Yeah. They traded. Yeah. Was that money? Did they not want to pay his contract?
I think they thought too that they could get a better bat there. Sometimes you can overthink it.
Oh yeah.
And you mixed with the chemistry there, and it might have been money. I don't know where Paul was salary-wise at that time, but obviously Franco cost them more money.
Sure.
I think they thought maybe they were upgrading because Paul had slipped a little as that 95 season went on. But I just thought, again, we messed with our chemistry. And then that, they cut Eddie Murray's salary initially after the 95 season. You're like, he came to camp and he was as mad as a hornet.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about Eddie Murray, you don't get a second chance. If you've crossed him, you're dead to him. And that really impacted our club too, because Eddie was revered in our clubhouse. And that was huge mistake in cutting his salary or trying to cut it.
You talk about don't cross Eddie Murray. Someone who didn't cross him but respected him enough was Albert Belle. The whole Fernando Vina thing, going back to the Brewers, when he, give the old forearm shiver to Fernando Vina in the baseline. The story goes, we don't need to go through it, but like he didn't run out a double play, or he didn't take out the Vina or someone at second in a double play. Murray got into his face in the dugout, told him, you need to do this, blah, blah, blah. And so then he bulldozed him over. So Bell knew what Eddie Murray was about. He respected him, and he knew not to, cross him. And whatever he says, he goes.
Right. And that was, again, you can't put a money figure on that importance, and they just, we had traded by Erga. So, it's amazing how many things changed in a hurry in 96 after that 95 season.
Mm-hmm.
We're at County Stadium when that collision took place, and I'm in the bathroom and Yuki's doing the game. You can hear they always have a speaker in the restroom when you run over there real quick. And I didn't get back before the inning started. Herb was doing the play-by-play anyway. And Yuki's like, ground ball to Vina, and Albert Belle has just made roadkill out of Vina. And so it was like on cue, he's calling the play. And that's when I had to go and quick see the replay because, and it was, how could the same play happen like back-to-back plate appearances too,
right?
With Albert on at first base.
Do you believe in baseball superstitions? And do you have one if you do?
No. And you'll hear fans of the ball club say, until they fire that clown, we'll never have another no-hitter pitched by now a Guardians pitcher, because I don't go by that. I had asked, Ernie Harwell early in my career, what do you do when a no-hitter's in progress? And he goes, you tell people what's going on. People aren't listening nonstop for 3 hours. They're tuning in, tuning out, getting into cars, getting out. It's up to you to alert them and not have them guessing as to what's going on. And as Ernie said, there hasn't been a no-hitter thrown in the history of the game where the pitcher said, I want to thank the broadcasters for not saying no-hitter during the course of the game, or this wouldn't have occurred.
So true.
And so I don't have any superstitions or believe in some of that baseball stuff. And like I say, you ask fans, because every time we come close to a no-hitter and we don't get it, I get blamed.
Last question. Your February, because we're in February here, 2023 Guardians predictions. Are you predictions guy? Do you like putting anything on record? Okay.
Who taught me that was Herbie. As Herbie used to say, this is why we play the game. And that's the beauty of our game. What I will say is, we have a chance to be really good, and we have a chance to play in October. Now, I would not have said that last February, but I legitimately believe, because again, as we've all learned in sports, you can have the best team money can buy, and if you can't stay healthy, it doesn't matter. And so, I think it's been one of the frustrating things for us has been in recent memory here. We get to the playoffs and we're never healthy. In 16, we win that World Series with a healthy Danny Salazar and Carlos Carrasco. And if Trevor Bauer hadn't been an idiot and played with his plane after he beat Boston in the first game of the playoffs, we win that World Series hands down. But again, injuries, made it much more difficult. But if we can stay relatively healthy, I think we're the best team in the division.
Easily.
Now, will that come into play? Will we play with the hunger that we had a year ago? Will we be able to replicate the late innings like we did a year ago? It's a new year. And even though it's most of the same guys, you still have to forge that identity. But the fact that we have that many guys already in camp, and there's a chemistry here that I think is pretty special, especially in today's game where teams are revolving all the time. I think, predict, I won't predict, but I'll definitely predict that we've got, a really good chance to play in October. And guys, you've seen it.
Yeah.
If you get in October, anything can happen. Now, we're going to have to be better offensively. I don't think we can survive without a little more power. And that may come in a trade this summer too.
Sure.
That's the thing where I think we're set up pretty good shape.
Here's a bonus question I thought of, and I asked Bradley this, and he laughed when I asked him this. When he was younger and with your kids, when you would ground them, did you give them a grounding? Like, would you yell at them like you were yelling a home run call?
I didn't do that, but they knew they were in trouble. I think our kids would say that, hopefully they felt they were brought up in a home with discipline, and they didn't always understand it. Suddenly they do now when they start having their own.
Sure.
But you know what? We were blessed. We really have great kids. And for the most part, the trouble they got into was pretty minimal. Brad never likes the story, but he was a really good basketball player. In fact, Kent State put him on their team after his baseball eligibility was up, and the NCAA said no because he was still on a baseball scholarship. But he was starting as a sophomore in the varsity at Avon Lake, and they were in a scrimmage before the season began. And he came off the floor, and I thought he I thought he was flippant toward the coach. He was mad about something that he didn't do. And I thought he kind of gave the coach a blow by, and I marched down the bleachers and grabbed him. And I said, you turn around and go back over there and apologize. And well, lo and behold, he hadn't done anything wrong. But, he was embarrassed. And I said, well, I was embarrassed a couple of moments ago watching him come off the floor. And, he probably didn't do anything wrong, but my wife and I believe that there's a right thing and a wrong way to play the game and live life. And so he'll tell you that story if you get him sometime, because then the coach was like, no, Tom, there's no. And it was an exhibition scrimmage. It wasn't like as a game, they're playing Elyria or whatnot, and then they're going to play another team. But it was like, you got to set some ground rules here, You're a sophomore starting. You're not that big a deal, So.
Well, we have fun with them, working with them. I work with them a little closer than Scott does with our shift. So I had to throw that question in there. When I asked him that, hey, did your dad ever say, get to your room or whatever? Way back in your room, go cut the grass, whatever.
That'd be the last thing, and I think, again, for us, it's not about what you do for a living. It's about your family. And we were blessed. They're great kids. And Brad never gave us a moment of trouble. So we're very lucky.
Well, he's doing a great job, and it's great to work with him and get to know him. And Tom, thank you for giving us an hour and 45 minutes of your time. My goodness. Scott and I could talk baseball with you for hours. Unfortunately, an hour and 45 is plenty for us.
And plenty for you.
and plenty for you, of course.
I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me. Love your work, both of you guys.
Thank you very much for being on our show, and good luck in spring training, and enjoy the nice weather.
Oh, gosh. We'll certainly do that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for listening to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You'll get notifications to your mobile device of the latest shows. Follow us on Twitter at Sabol Brothers, at John_Sabol.
And Scott Sabol, FOX8. Send us a message if you have any suggestions, comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll check you next time.